this week's program. We're going to be finding out why New Zealand racehorses are doing so well in Australia, and actually talk to a chap who's taking one over there to show the Aussies how to race. We're also going to be talking about FAR and what they're doing as far as research into radish. But in just a moment, it's farm accounting. Gary, the herd scheme, the latest figures?
Yeah, so the government have just released those. Basically across the board we've got major increases. No real surprise because it's a reflection of where the market's at. The rising one, dairy and beef heifers, all up over 50%. So
50%?
Yeah, quite a large jump on those this year.
Does that mean that the dairy industry is starting to smile again?
It's starting to show there's some positive signs there. So, and because this is one of the methods that a lot of farmers use to value their livestock, or their accountants do anyway. So we've been waiting for these just to see where they're at, and it's, as I said, not really a big surprise.
Good. What about other stuff like sheep and goats?
Pretty
and,
much sort of
deer?
anywhere between 18 to 30% increases. Yeah, pigs and goats are actually down a little bit. So they've come back just a fraction, but everything else is pretty much up.
It's not really an indication of the market, what you're going to get for your stock, is it, or not?
No, it's sort of a snapshot of the national average market value of anything on a particular day. So you know, yours could be worth more when you actually get into the market, or it could be worth less, but for valuation purposes, this is what we've got to use.
I sort of guess that it's almost like the rateable value for a property.
Exactly, yeah, pretty much the same, yeah. They just sort of take an average and apply it to everyone.
So how does it work as far as you as an accountant and your clients?
Well, basically, when you come to do the end of year financials, you've got to value your livestock. Now, there's several methods for doing it. This is a very common one. It's probably one of the easiest ones to use. Depending on what the farmer's done and what the accountant's done in previous years, you may use it again or you may not. There's a bit of flexibility around that. But yeah, it's pretty much, you just sort of take the number of the stock and multiply it by the value, and there's your valuation at year end.
And of course, anything that's fallen over dead is rated at that average price.
No, it goes through a zero.
Does it?
Yeah. So anything that dies during the year, at the start of the year it had a cost, at the end of the year it's worth nothing. So
you can't write it off as a
well,
loss.
you get a write-off in terms of the actual opening value is gone on that animal.
Yeah,
so
okay.
it does become an expense.
That's why we have chartered accountants.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Now, the budget.
Yeah, obviously we know that the tax thresholds have moved. The question we're asking is, did they do enough? You know, you've got.
Well, you're never going to get them to do enough.
No,
Gary.
but you've got those people on over 70,000 a year, and they're paying 60% of all tax for New Zealand. Now that doesn't really seem fair, and these changes will probably skew that more. So we're just putting the question out there: did they really go far enough in terms of those thresholds? It's good they moved them, but I think the top one should have moved at the same time.
Do you think that farmers will adjust their personal income down so that they can sort of hide more, not hide more, but bury more?
Well, the day after the budget, we did have a call from two farmers asking how can they get under the thresholds to get more in their hand. So they're already starting to think about it, which it's a good sign. You know, they're aware of where everything's at and what they need to do. So we'll be working with those people to see what we can do.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a delicate situation because it's personal income rather than farm expenses.
Exactly, yeah, and you can't push it too far. If you go too far, then you obviously go foul of IRD, so you don't want to go into that sort of territory.
No, red flags are not good, Gary.
No, definitely not.
No. Now, what's the latest in the employment world?
So the IRD have put out a policy statement about employing farm staff, and in particular the rental accommodation you provide them. So yeah, they're on the farm, you provide them a house. Under the legislation, you're supposed to put a farm rental on that and put PAYE on it. Now, everyone says, oh, well, you know, what do I put on in terms of value? How do I establish it? Well, now IRD have got this clear policy and have come out and said, right, you know, here's some guidelines for you. So the first thing they're saying is, what sort of accommodation are you providing? So if you've got to look at the level of it in terms of, you know, is it luxury, is it run down, and that sort of starts affecting the rental of it. You've got to look at what amenities are available on that property. And some farms, you know, it might be a 4-bedroom house, but only one person occupying it, so they'll block off a couple of the bedrooms, you know, lock them off so they can't use them. So you've got to take that into account, you know, sort of say, well, yeah, the rental of this house would be probably this much, but they're only using a quarter of it, so we'll adjust it down.
So let me make this clear. The person who is put up in that house, or the people, that's part of their payment, so therefore it's taxable.
Yeah, so what happens is that normally the farmer gives them an allowance as part of the PAYE calculations for the farm rental, and then they make a deduction. Now that allowance that the farmer makes for the rental is subject to PAYE, and the farm worker pays tax on it.
You would have, yeah, okay. So it's not dissimilar to fringe benefit tax in a funny sort of a way.
Sort of, yeah.
It's sort of a cousin there somehow.
Yeah, it sort of lines up. It's an area where a lot of farmers don't necessarily do it right. They'll just say, well, look, I'll give you a piece of the property to live in, sort of thing, and that's it. They don't make this other adjustment, and if they do, they put a very minimal rent on it. They go, oh, yeah, it's $50 a week. That's when we charge you, and put it through it like that. Now this IRD policy comes out and says that's not going to be the case. You've got to look as if it's an independent person, and what would you charge them if they were coming on the property if they weren't an employee? Yeah,
okay. That also, Kerry, opens the door for things like meat and power and phone.
There's all sorts of things. Definitely meat would be one that you've got to think about. That's got to be adjusted for. And the power, a lot of it the farm covers, or they sort of take a piece off the employee. They say, right, farm power is this, I'm going to charge you so much a week. And
you see, the person who's renting that house, in inverted commas,
yes,
doesn't actually, I mean, if it was me, I'd have to pay for my own power.
Yeah, so it gets a bit more complicated when you get on farm. And it all comes down to different arrangements, but the key is you've got to put a property value on it.
Yeah, okay.
You can't just...
I mean, I'm actually probably just pushing it a wee bit far here,
yeah.
but people should talk to their chartered accountant
yes,
about
definitely.
it.
Now that we've got this clear policy statement, and it also gives you some guidelines about how to do that rental valuation. So if you haven't been doing it, or you've only been charging very minimal, then give your accountant a call and find out exactly what you've got to do.
Brilliant. Now, insurance premiums.
Yep, they're going to be going up. So farmers need to start budgeting for this. We've got two hits coming. So the fire service is obviously increasing their levy. That's going up by 40% from the 1st of July. That's a result of the fire service and New Zealand Rural Fire merging. So it's quite a large chunk there. And then the budget, the government also turned around and said, look, we're putting the EQC levy up. They run out of money. So they're going to put up that by about 30% as well.
30%?
Some around there. So
yeah, I didn't read that in the fine print in the budget.
And so there's quite a big sort of change coming. I think it's about $30-40 a normal house for some of it, plus the fire levy on top. So, but the fire levy applies to your house, your contents and your vehicles.
Because that whole thing about firefighting and you being in the gun, if it's heading towards you, it didn't even hit your property, you're still paying for helicopters. Yeah,
so that's that's part of it in there. But this levy is to sort of fund the fire service to respond to anything even in town. So, but it's going to apply to everyone. So it's going to be quite a large increase, especially if you've got 3 or 4 properties on your house on the property, and then you've got 6 or 7 vehicles as well. If they're all going up by 40%. It's going to hurt.
I'm not sure whether to thank you or not, but Kerry, I will. Thank you very much indeed. Obviously, it's winter, and that means there's winter racing at Riccarton. We talk to Tim Mills in a minute. Tim, winter season coming in. How's it looking?
Yeah, funny you should say that. The year seems to be flying by, and looking over my shoulder, you can certainly see a hint of winter in the middle of May. But yeah, countdown's on to the Grand National Racing Festival in the first week in August.
You've got races in the meantime, though?
Yeah, quite a few race meetings. We've got races on the 19th of May, again on midweek meeting on the 7th of June, and a very good Saturday meeting on the 24th of June. And that allows us a 5-week gap to get everything ready, in particular to get the track back, so that it's at its best for those big premier meetings at the Grand National.
How do people qualify for that Grand National meeting?
Well, it's just the normal class system. The main races, of course, are the E-Star Winter Cup, which is a Group 3 race. So the better the horses perform, the higher the rating goes up. It's an open race. So when the entries come in, the field's selected from the highest rated down to 18 horses. Draw the line there, and it's just done on the rating that the horses have accumulated as they compete during the months leading up.
So you do have to qualify?
Yeah, you have to qualify in the sense that you have to perform well to race for the higher stakes. At the Grand National meeting, there's, I think last year we ran 32 races, so there's a race for every type of horse, but of course the stake money goes up for the higher rated races. For instance, the maiden races will be $10,000 and the Group 3 E-Star Winter Cup will be $100,000. Similarly, the same thing applies to the jumping races, where the maiden jumps race will be $15,000, and the 2 big Grand National races, the Racecourse Hotel Grand National Steeplechase, for instance, is a $75,000 race. So you qualify, in the sense you qualify by performing well, although there will be a racing option for every type of horse over the meeting.
It must be very exciting for somebody who's new into the industry as an owner to have that sort of festival coming up.
Oh, absolutely, because that's when you can show off. And you know people like being here when they can take their mates to the races, take boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, and walk around saying, I've got my horse in on the big stage. It's anyone can get there. You don't have to have bought the best horse in the world. You can just have got a horse that develops and progresses, and you can come to the big meeting. There's good crowds. Your horse is performing in front of people, performing through the TV screens. So yeah, that excitement level certainly builds.
Syndication, is that a big thing for the gallopers?
Yeah, very much so, and probably more so over the last 10 or 15 years. It's evolved to make it affordable for people to race a horse. For instance, there's 18, 19, 20 people in a horse, so you're paying 5% of the costs. If you've got that sort of figure of people participating, makes it affordable, and people get that same thrill whether they own 5% of the horse or 100% of the horse. You'll hear people who've got 2.5% going, my horse is in on Saturday. That's where it builds up.
So how do people get involved with a syndicate?
In the main, it's through knowing a trainer who might put a group of people together, though there are some very, very good public syndication businesses out there, and you can track them down through a website. There's any number, there's 5 or 6 really, really good ones that promote actively. They're registered, so they have a code of conduct they have to adhere to, so people's rights and interests are protected, which is good. You have to have that. It's a good vote of confidence in the industry that those people do have to measure up to a set of criteria. But you just Google racehorse syndication, you'll come across the available ones.
There must be a big buzz to have a photograph of your horse on the office wall.
Yeah, well, I've got quite a few over there. Well, not quite a few. I've been lucky enough to win a few races, but those memories live with you. And I'd like to get one of the big ones. For instance, I'd love to get a Grand National or a Winter Cup photo on the wall one day.
So would your bank manager?
Yeah, so the bank manager, yeah. A great mate of mine says they've never put a pockets yet in that wooden overcoat, so you can't take it with you. You may as well enjoy it while you've got it here, and racing's one hell of a way to do that.
Why is it that New Zealand horses go to Australia and beat the living daylights out of them?
I just think it's another one of the strong arms of the New Zealand farming industry. New Zealand horses have historically always gone to Australia and won. You can go right back to Carbine, who was born, stabled across the road here at the Racecourse Hotel, trained by Dan O'Brien, who owned that pub at that time, way back in the 1800s. He was transferred to Australia after his 2-year-old career and ended up winning the Melbourne Cup. So they've been doing it forever. I think it's just the skill of the New Zealand horse farmers. There's a lot to be said about the New Zealand climate and the New Zealand soil structure that breeds good, strong bone, sound horses. And we've got some very, very good horse people. We've got just people who have a great skill at preparing racehorses and riding racehorses.
I guess also the yearling sales would open the door to a fair few going over and becoming Australian. Yeah,
well, they do, and of course, in a little bit, the breeding's a lot cross-pollinated nowadays, because broodmares can be put on a plane, flown backwards and forwards, be mated with stallions in either country, and in some ways it's almost getting to be an Australasian breeding regime in that sense. But the horses that are born and reared here and are developed by our horse people certainly receive the benefits of those skills.
And it's becoming a big industry, isn't it, going over there and racing?
Always has been, Rob. It's I don't know if it's got any bigger or any smaller, but it's always been a very, very big industry. The yearling sales going back to the days when Dave Clarkson, a name that older viewers will remember, was a great auctioneer, the late great Peter Kelly. They auctioned some of the best horses in Australasia from the national sales at Trentham, and now, of course, latterly at Karaka through New Zealand Bloodstock. It's always been a big deal, always has been a big industry for New Zealand.
There's lovely stories about people who paid a couple of $100,000 and did okay, but there's those who paid $200,000 and did very well as well.
Well, there's even the better stories, the ones that paid $1,100 or $3,000 and developed the best and ended up with the best horse in the land. Or, there was a great story about the champion or the near champion Viandacross, who I think he was bought for $400 as a foal at foot, with his mother, and I think Bone Crusher was $1,100, and Rough Habit was a handful of dollars, and that keeps us in the game, because if you had to be the richest person and go to the yearling sales and buy the dearest lot, then we wouldn't all be in the game. But we all know that you can get that freak horse from anywhere, which makes the game, that's the beauty of the game and what keeps us all in it.
Not sure why your camellias aren't cooperating? Try Growshaw Planting Magic. packed full of nutrients in just one handful. Be sure with Grow Sure from KiwiCare.
Dennis, stock movements, it's a bit of a problem looming there.
Yes, Rob. At this time of the year, many arable farmers run sheep, store lambs normally, and of course sometimes they have to move them on the country roads. And we've just noticed, and it's quite concerning, that a lot of the motorists now perhaps are not from the country, that are moving out, living in the country, and not used to driving through stock or understanding the things that can happen when farmers are bringing stock out driveways onto the roads, and their dogs are not all $5,000 dogs that really have a mind of their own. And when you shear sheep, of course, they become quite a bit faster than when they had the wool on. They really take off and hard to control. And farmers are out there with the yellow lights, the beacons going, and people standing out there, and the motorists come hurtling along at 100 k's an hour and just have been desensitised to the flashing lights. Basically, flashing lights to them seems to be a sign to go faster.
It's in the old days we were very user-friendly when it came to mobs of sheep, because there must have been more of them perhaps.
Well, I think so, Rob, and I think there's an old law that, where they used to drove stock to the sale yards and so forth, where stock have the right of way, and we've completely forgotten all of those things. But the erratic behaviour of sheep and dogs and people and motorists are not a very good mix, and somebody's going to get killed, or animals killed, cars damaged. It's just going to happen, and I just ask people to respect. People don't sit on motorbikes and utes with flashing lights outside gateways
Because they're bored.
Because they're bored. They don't. They mean something, and read that caution. And we do go slower for roadworks because we've been conditioned to it, and perhaps because there's a traffic cop maybe just watching too, and they can get some good cops exceeding those roadwork speeds because they're quite low. But the same thing applies with farmers with their warnings. They're not there for a joke. They're there for a reason, and for the safety of everybody concerned, please slow down.
Bottom line is the farmer, the shepherd, whatever, is going to try to shift the sheep to one side so you can drive through.
Well, absolutely. That's right, Rob, too. Some people have absolutely not a clue in the world how to drive through stock. There's grass at the sides of the road. Yes. Normally, the sheep will not graze on the tar seal. They go to the side. So, if you stick to the centre,
I'm laughing because your word is so right. I mean,
the mind images, absolutely. And then, of course, sometimes motorists avoid the sides of the road because they're going to get stuck.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so do avoid the side of the road because you can get stuck in some heavy country. So stick to that middle, ease your way through. The farmer will understand what you're doing. He'll help you out. He'll send the dog through the middle or around them and force them onto one side of the road for you. Just work with the people.
We've had a lot of stubble fires. Have we still got a problem with people panicking?
We have really, Rob. It's getting to the stage now where some farmers who, burning of stubble crops, as long as it's not in the designated close proximities to a couple of towns that have been identified, is still a legitimate and legal practice, albeit that the farmer has to have a smoke management plan filled out. He has to talk to neighbours. He has to respect smoke going over roads. But guess what? If the wind changes, farmers are pretty good. They haven't got control of that. And so things do change occasionally, but everybody's running around with a cell phone now, and the do-gooders and the people who think they're doing the right thing are almost causing harassment. And those volunteer firemen that are out there, 24 hours, they're not on a shift. They have to give up their job or jump out of their beds and go chasing fires. Sure, so don't disturb them and annoy them when it's a legitimate fire. And recently we had one that was probably the safest stubble fire we've ever had. The fire brigade turned up at the road, lights blaring, and we're thinking, oh, we're criminals, there's something wrong. The fire chief walks down the paddock. here I am with a 3,000 litre sprayer with water in it, ready to douse anything that may have happened. 11 metre fire break, and the fire chief says to me, "Nothing wrong here, is there?" I said, "No, the only thing that's wrong here is you guys have had to leave your jobs, run away, spend hours chasing smoke, and really, have you got the name of the person who rang it in?" And I said, "Yes." "Right." I said, "Charge them with public nuisance."
No, fair comment. Fair comment.
Absolutely, and there was 5 fires going that day, and I think the fire brigades, between the 2 local fire brigades, went to every one, because people panic, they don't understand, and it's just too easy to dial 111 thinking they're being good. Well, actually they are being potentially, not always, a public nuisance.
Wheat plantings?
Yes, Rob, not that there's any money in growing wheat,
Ooh.
or a lot of money in growing wheat, but there have been some very good wheat planting conditions in terms of moist land and early reasonable clearance of that land, with some stubble fires and things like that, whereby there's been some great conditions for planting wheat, and there's some good crops coming up. Those crops probably are 2 weeks earlier in the ground than normal, and of course that will make them more susceptible to the potential for aphid coming in the autumn and causing barley yellow dwarf virus. Also for the potential for septoria to fall in and get the fungi infection, because the leaves are up earlier, and the main septoria season will go on for longer coming into those crops. So there's a couple of warnings that, you know, the aphid pressure could be greater, albeit that we've had some good frosts, and the septoria levels could be lifted as well.
Because wheat's actually cheaper than barley at the moment.
Well, it is, and that's a bit of an anomaly, and it's all to do with supply and demand, and farmers have tried to grow anything else except barley in the spring, fill up their paddocks. Barley was the last resort, and so the tonnages and storage of barley are quite low, and of course the yields per hectare, wheat versus barley, there's quite a disparity there. You know, the average barley yield's probably just short of 8 tonne to the hectare, and the average wheat is getting up there around 10-11 tonne per hectare. So that's something that's happening anyway in terms of volume. So it's a supply and demand thing, and there's probably $20 to $30 a tonne difference, where a lot of farmers see wheat as a more valuable commodity.
Very briefly, are people catching on for it as a stock feed?
Yes, they are, and then they move away, and then they come back. And there's quite a few differences. You know, the high protein, the starch, the sugars, and the fibre that you can get from grain, it's very, very concentrated. You don't have to feed much. You don't consume, the animals don't consume a lot of energy in digesting it. You can put some cheap filler straw in with it, and they've still had the goodies. It's easy to store in silos and things like that, and it's a real powerhouse, and it's a concentrated form of nutrition.
Let you have a little advertisement, but you did right, Dennis. Thank you very much indeed. Staying on the same sort of subject, in a moment we'll be talking to Far about radish.
All growers know of white blister. It's something that they deal with every season. They might know it as white rust as opposed to white blister. So it's not a true rust, so that classification's been wrong. It's more belongs with the downy mildew type fungus, which isn't actually a true fungus and is water dependent. So often seen following irrigation and events like that around the time of bolting, when temperatures are starting to warm up. First of all, the growers will see a paling or yellowing tinge to the upper side of the leaves. Then if you flick that leaf over, you'll see white spores on the bottom that look like blisters, hence the name the white blister. From there, the disease will progress, and you'll start to see white lesions on the stem, and eventually you'll see them affecting the heads and causing what we call stag's head. And then from there it progresses onto the pods, and from there we see the spores actually ending up in the seed. So you might not see flowering at all, and that's not good in a hybrid crop. So you don't get often the males will get infected more heavily than the females, and without that pollen you don't end up with a lot of seed. Generally we manage it with fungicides, so the metalaxyl type products are the most commonly used. Once the disease is actually seen, it's most likely that that disease is systemic, and therefore control is going to be very difficult. Most of the fungicides probably only control expression of the disease while it stays inside the plant. So actually, when it's fully systemic, it's very difficult to control. So this trial includes a number of fungicides, primarily aimed at late blight control in potatoes. So a fungus in the same type of family. From here, there's probably 2 or 3 options that look really promising for control of white blister that aren't currently being used. We didn't get a lot of early season disease, which we think is when control actually needs to happen, but we've got enough disease occurring post-January, February that we should be able to draw some conclusions out of here. You tell me when it's going to be harvested, when we get some nice weather. From here, hopefully we'll get this harvested in the next 3 weeks, so somewhere in April, and those results should be available following cleaning in June, July sort of time frame. We believe that the white blister we see is coming from a couple of different sources. So one, airborne spores, but the primary infection is possibly coming from either seed-borne infection or maybe it's possible that the disease could also be endophytic. So we may not be able to control the disease with seed treatments or through cultural means. So we're currently exploring the seed treatment idea to see if we can control that. We're also trying to confirm whether the fungus is endophytic or seed-borne. We know we can find spores on the seed, so that's an area that the seed treatments that are currently used should control, but they may not control an endophytic type of infection. There is also well known that white blister infects shepherd's purse, and usually we like to control shepherd's purse from that aspect, but the shepherd's purse in the literature has that it's actually a different strain. So there's a number of different strains of white blister, generally only crop specific. So the radish white blister shouldn't infect broccoli, and the shepherd's purse white blister shouldn't infect radish. However, still got to confirm that from a New Zealand perspective. So the research program's ongoing. We've currently got a seed treatment trial underway, so looking at seed treatments for controlling early season disease. We are trying to determine whether the fungus is endophytic, so actually living inside the seed. So the seed treatments would therefore need to be very mobile and to be able to control the disease. We also will progress with treatments that are in this trial here. So there's a number of experimental treatments in here which could become options for next season. So if we can determine whether the disease is endophytic and then incorporating some of these treatments into next season's work, hopefully at a lot earlier timing. So we try and work out whether we need to apply them at the cotyledon stage, first true leaf, 2 leaves, 3 leaves, when we actually need to start applying to control the disease. Working out whether it's endophytic will give us some idea as to when we need to start applying some of these products. Well, I think there'll be a couple of products out of here that growers will be able to mix in with their current standard practice fungicide applications. I think they need to be vigilant and start applying fungicides a lot earlier than a lot of people are. So by earlier, I'm not sure what we'll be talking yet, but we could be talking cotyledon stage. We'll see what the seed treatment trials throw at us, and what we've got foliar fungicide stuff in the glasshouse, see what that tells us. But yeah, there should be a couple of products that people can use that are new and different modes of action to what we've got. Growers also need to be aware that this family of fungi do have high risk of resistance. So using the same product and the same mode of action repeatedly, like could be used 5 or 6 times in a season, is actually high risk for developing resistance. When it's systemic, it's very hard to get an appropriate dose of fungicide to that fungi. So if it's endophytic, we're also talking an application going on as a seed treatment. So resistance management's key. Applying fungicides earlier is probably another key message.
You know that saying, content is king? Well, in today's mixed media world, it's true. You need video, audio, photos and more for social media, for marketing, for communications, sales and for advertising. And you need this at a price that works with your budgets. Well, that's what we do. At Tandem, we partner with you to create the content that you can use to shout to the world or video link to a few. Connect with us and we'll help you connect to the world.
Not sure how to brighten up your backyard? Try Grow Sure Easy Flowers, all in one mix. Seed, feed, mulch. It's bloomin' easy. Be sure with Grow Sure from KiwiCare.
Rural Women New Zealand, what's the latest? Because you do a lot of wonderful things.
We do, and actually Rural Women's been very, very busy lately, particularly in advocacy and profile building activities. We've been doing a lot of work on the new firearms changes to that Act.
As in?
There was just reviews of what was happening, so we made submissions on that and met with Paula Bennett and her staff to talk about the impacts of potential changes for the rural community. And it was really around common sense stuff and making sure that whatever changes are made are rural proofed, because rural people have a different need of firearms than perhaps others or hunters or recreational users might have. So we wanted to make sure that what was being done wasn't going to impact on farming and farmers' abilities and so on with use of firearms.
No stupidity like that suggestion that all the farmers put all their guns into one particular place and came in and signed them out.
Yeah, I mean, practicalities that just aren't going to work when you look at it in a rural environment. So we talk very much about that. And it's certainly been a key focus of a lot of our advocacy lately. There seems to be a move away from rural proofing policies, and we want to get back and then say, hey, look, things are different for the rural, and you should be looking at rural as a sector in its own right. Whether you look at youth or cultural groups or whatever, but rural needs its own sector because there's so many things that are different, and that was a key focus of a lot of our advocacy. We've also talked about the domestic violence bill and things that were needed there. Certainly there was a lot of talk in the media at the time about special leave for domestic violence, and people saying, oh, what do you need that for? Well, actually for rural people it's not such a bad idea because all the support services are usually in town. So, for women or even men to access those services, you need time off. You need time to go to town, organise somewhere else to live, organise any kind of whatever support you need. And you actually need time off work to be able to do that. So having leave for that's actually quite a sensible suggestion, and so we were quite supportive of that in principle.
Where would they go? Well,
a lot of rural towns don't even have women's refuge, so you need somewhere to go. You need to find access to that, and you also need to go to town, find out where you can find a house to live in, where you can move, where you can perhaps find other work or whatever legal proceedings. If you've got to go to court, you need time off to do those things. So having special leave related to that is actually quite useful, particularly for rural women who have to travel long distances to gain support services.
Here, I'm going to suggest that if somebody who's been a victim of rural violence, personal violence in the rural area, wouldn't know where to start looking at that, Are you, as an organisation, available to help guide people through to a degree?
Yes, certainly through our national office and our local branches we could steer people in the right direction, but most people would access that through initially self-referring to the likes of Women's Refuge, who even if they don't have services in that location can walk people through the process.
Yep.
So it's either through the Women's Refuge or the police, or some people even just access it through talking to their GP.
I was just going to say
and
GP.
just say, you know, I've got this problem at home, and the GP can help steer them in the right direction and to whatever the services
It's a
they
case
might
of
find.
opening doors, because
Absolutely.
that woman would have absolutely no self-respect left, I would imagine.
Often that's the case, and feel very unempowered and feel that they don't even have the ability to ask for help. So, you know, there are ways of getting to that help quite simply.
That's
And-
good.
and
I
so
mean, that's important for them.
Things like a special leave, we can take a day off work to go and organise that stuff, is really helpful, especially when it's not available in your local town and you've got to travel somewhere. We also talked about the changes to the Education Amendment Act and how that can be rural proofed, and things that we need to look at from the rural perspective. It's things like, you know, just that universal right to quality education. It needs to be the same in town as it is to rural, and which is all about resourcing and funding. We also talked about the importance of retaining school in the community, making sure we don't close our rural schools, that they're there because of the role that they have within the community, that greater role of being the glue that holds a community together. Often people say that, you know, once their children finish school, they're kind of out of the loop, and school's so important in a rural community. The other thing we were very concerned about is the move to more online learning, which is really going to impact in rural communities, because the government's done a lot of work in getting broadband through fibre to the school, but the households don't have that access. So if you then start saying, oh, we're going to do more online learning, how do the children access that when they haven't got internet at home? So we're talking about, you know, you've actually got to think how it's going to impact beyond the school building if you change those sorts of policies. So we did a lot of work around that. We've also been investigating things such as GP shortages in the rural communities, what's needed, what are the gaps, what kind of programs need to be put in place. The voluntary bonding hasn't been perhaps as successful as it might have been, so what else needs to happen? How do we access good numbers of GPs for the shortages that are already there, and recognising that there is an ageing workforce who are all going to be retiring in the next 10 years or so. How do we make sure that we've still got good GP services? And boarding allowances for children going to boarding schools, and making sure that that's a realistic program, that it's actually providing the assistance that people are needing. Also, we were heavily involved in the South Pacific Area Conference for Associated Country Women of the World, which was held in New Plymouth at the start of May. We had quite a large contingent of women there, and we talked about a range of issues, quite a wide number of issues. We went through cervical screening programs. We talked about button batteries. It's those little cell batteries that children seem to swallow with great regularity, and wanting to push for greater safety standards around that. We also talked about marine protection of the marine environment, both the corals and the fish and food resources. Very important to a lot of our South Pacific island nations in terms of their food security, which was the other issue we talked about quite broadly, was the differences in the values between food security and food sovereignty. And a lot of people think they're the same thing, and they're actually not. Food security is about making sure people have enough food, good quality food as they need it. Food sovereignty takes that further and talks about the actual production of the food. You know, who's in charge? You know, do you have control over your land ownership? You know, who owns the land? Who decides what fertilisers you can put in? Who decides what access to water you have, or access to seeds, and how are those seeds produced? Who controls the price of your product and where and when it's marketed? And that's all around sovereignty. And so we're seeing a greater move from people, whether it be subsistence farming right up to corporate farming, is, you know, who's actually controlling the production of the food. And once you control production of your own food, you then have food security. So a lot more
comes
work
in
being done
together,
on
doesn't
that.
it? Thank you very much indeed. Now, we've already heard about the fact that New Zealand horses are going over to Australia, and I shouldn't smirk, but they are actually doing very, very well. We meet up with Peter Rudkin, who's actually taking one of his clients' horses over to do exactly that. But you're sending one of your horses over to Australia to take them on.
That's right. Yeah. The owners decided to have a go at Australia and you know, send this 3-year-old filly over there, and her name's Don't Poke the Tiger, and she's done very well in New Zealand here.
Very pretty horse.
She is, and she knows it too. Like at times, she gets up on her toes at times, but yeah, she's a runner, and she's done very well for us. Yeah.
So, what special training do you do to get them over to totally different conditions?
To be fair, no different to what we're doing here, really, in a way. I've never taken a horse over to Australia before, so it's going to be an eye-opener for myself and the horse.
But we do go over there with horses and beat them.
That's correct, yeah. You've got to have the right sort of horse to do it. We're going to find out whether she's good enough. She's definitely good enough in New Zealand. She's 6 times black print placed. Hasn't quite got there as a win yet, but she's won 2 races other than that.
What age group is she?
She's a 3-year-old. So she's going over there for the Guineas on July the 1st.
How do you get them over there? Obviously by aeroplane.
That's right, yeah. We're flying out of Christchurch on the 9th of June, and I think we're targeting a lead-up race at Ipswich, and then into July the 1st is the Guineas at Caloundra. And so I'm a little bit sort of not 100% clear on the owner sort of has mapped it out, and I'm going for a ride.
She's getting a look in before she goes though.
Yes, she runs here on the 7th because she had a bit of a spell, and so on the 7th, fresh up at Riccarton here, just down the chute. We're using it as a trial, and then 2 days later we fly out. And
she's taking her best friend as the groom.
Yeah, Alexis is going with it, my partner, and she'll go with the horse and look after it. That's the plan. So really, it's just continuation of taking these jolly Aussies on, isn't it? Well, it's trying to get a bit of black print for the horse. In New Zealand, all the 3-year-old Guineas are finished, and so we thought they go a bit longer in Australia, and so we're aiming to try and get that win as a black print for her. I think she'll come back again. I definitely. Craig Dawson, the owner, he's a breeder, and so he's had a very good offer for the horse up till now, and he's turned it down, and no, he's got it for a broodmare. Do you reckon she's another Winx? Oh, I don't think so. She's not that good. There's not many Winx about. We all like to dream about it. So you must be really rapt though as a trainer to have a horse that's going international. Oh, definitely, and I say I'm privileged to have this horse. It's not very often you get a good horse like this one is, my best in the stable, and you've got to look after them.
I've been reporting on farming matters on the radio and newspapers and on television for 40 or so years, but communication, like farming, has moved on. So we've come up with On the Land, online and through YouTube on any screen, anytime and anywhere. Just push play and see and hear what's happening today in our rural community. You'll learn and be informed about the latest and best information farming matters. On the Land, bringing farming information into the 21st century. So join us on our website, ontheland.co.nz. Karen, winter blues.
Yeah, that time of year's hit again, hasn't it, Rob? As I've mentioned before, one of the ways of coping with any of life's downs, including winter blues, is to have a good level of happiness before you start. But let's assume for a second that people haven't, and that we're starting, or we haven't worked on that already. Probably about 95% of the population haven't, yes. So let's be honest. So let's assume that we haven't done that and winter's hit. One of the things I find, I used to tell myself and tell everyone else around me, I hate winter. All winter I go around and say, I hate winter, I hate the cold. And one day I realised what I was doing, and I thought, well, of course I'm going to hate it if I keep telling myself I hate it. So this is going to sound easy and hard all at the same time, because working with your mind is actually, it sounds simple, but it's actually not. Yeah. I never say that anymore. I refuse to, because I know that, because your body and your emotions follow your mind. So I change my thoughts, and I tell myself, winter's good. There's lots of things I like about winter, and I'm purposely self-talking all the time. I've only recently come to realise quite how much I do it. I self-talk a lot to build my happiness or my mood up, because let's face it, Life in general brings our mood down. Winter especially brings it down. So you've got to self-talk a lot to bring it back up. So I'm constantly saying, life is good.
So what I'm talking about, I guess, is a week of overcast, bleak days.
Yes.
And it's pretty hard to sort of find something good about that.
There is, but there's two ways that I would deal with that. And the first way is this. Let's talk about choice for a minute. Have you ever read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning?
No.
It's a great book. It's only a little book, but it's really, really good. I think it's a bestseller. And Viktor Frankl was a psychologist or psychiatrist, young man, Jew, who went into the concentration camps. And this book is about that, but it's very different from most books about the concentration camps because he was interested in the way the mind works, being a psychiatrist. So he wrote the book from that perspective, and he wrote about what made some people do well and some people not do well. And it's quite fascinating, but one of the things he said which really got to me was that we had choice. And you think, how can someone in a prison, in a concentration camp, have choice? And he said, you might think you've got no choice and no control, but he said the opposite is true. He said you've got choice. You've got choices to make every minute of every day. Like, do I eat this bit of bread now or save it for later because it's all I've got? And he said it was all about the choices you made through the day. And when I think about that, that really struck a chord with me. And I think I've got a choice in everything, whether I think I have or not. So like, for instance, on a horrible winter day, you're wondering where I'm going with this, aren't you?
I wasn't going to say anything about that, no.
On a horrible winter's day, we've got a choice. We can be here in our life doing what we're doing, or we can, like, if we hate winter that much, right? We could live in India where it's cheap, or Indonesia where it's cheap. We could move and live there and never have winter, right? Why don't we? We're choosing, whether you believe it or not, we're choosing not to for whatever reasons. There's good and there's good, good and bad for everything, but we're choosing the life we've got. And on the horrible days, I remind myself, Karen, if you wanted to be off living cheaply in Indonesia, you could be. You're choosing to be here. And when I remind myself that I'm choosing it, it makes me feel better. We could choose to swan off to Australia tomorrow. Yes, it would cost money that we've got earmarked for something else, but we could do it. We might lose our house because we can't pay the rent, but we could do it. We're choosing to spend our money in this way and stay here. It makes all the difference.
How important are treats? I mean, to me, winter is roast vegetables and roast meats, and that's a treat for me.
If we talk practically, there's lots of practical things you can do to lift your mood. But what about if you were to treat yourself with a kind thought, with a really sweet thought? Because we treat ourselves with sweet foods or good foods or wines. What if you were to treat yourself with a really kind and loving thought?
Oh yeah, right. I mean, we're talking here about New Zealanders who if they look in the mirror, they can't say I love you because they've been, for the last 5 or 10 generations, we've been told we can't.
I'm giving you the answer here. This works. But you're right, it's not easy. You've got sometime in some people a lifetime of thinking negatively about yourself, of pulling yourself down, especially when we look in the mirror. We're really good at that. This works, but you've got to start to, if you start with a little tiny better thought, telling yourself that you love yourself is quite a big step up for some people. Start with a little thought like, yeah, I'm not the best looking person in the world, but I'm a good person. That's a little good thought, right? And we can start having we can start treating ourselves with our thoughts, which is going to make us feel better, which funnily enough is going to make us feel better about the winter blues.
That's the sort of thing where you say, I've got some very good stock out here because I'm actually a very good farmer.
What a good thought to have. That's a treat if you were to think that about yourself. But we don't, do we?
It's just being proud of yourself, is it?
It's good to be proud of yourself. It's really good. I was out with some people in a walking group yesterday and someone said to the other person, you look really young for your age. And he said, I know. And the other person like, oh, you shouldn't say that. And I thought to myself, yes, you should. You're allowed to accept a compliment. You're allowed to feel proud of yourself, but we think that we're not allowed to. So we're definitely not allowed to have nice thoughts about ourselves.
This comes back to the reality of we feeling special, and as I said, 98% of the population won't do it because it's been drummed out of them.
Yes, I'm not worthy. I'm not deserving. Thoughts that we don't necessarily walk around with but are in our subconscious mind. And so if you're not worthy or deserving or good enough, you definitely can't have a nice thought about yourself, and you definitely can't accept a compliment that comes your way either.
How do you, I know this is a really strange question, but how do you get somebody who has taken hidings all their lives to turn that round?
As you know, I practice a form of energy psychology known as EFT.
And you've got an amazing book.
Thank you, I do. I do say so myself. And it is I think EFT is amazing because it can truly change those beliefs that you've held your whole life. And just saying to yourself, you need to believe in yourself, you need to treat you, all the things I'm saying today are really hard to do. But if we use EFT, they become easy.
And getting rid of all that negativity is actually very, very valuable.
Well, if we've got time for a short analogy.
Very, very short.
If I've got a hole of dirty, muddy water in my backyard and I say to you, Rob, can you help me clean it out? And you go, yeah, of course I will. And you bring this big bucket of clean water and you tip it in. You haven't cleaned it out at all, have you?
No.
And if we imagine that the clean water is positivity, same in life. If you just try and be positive but you haven't cleaned the dirt out first, i.e. the negative thoughts, beliefs and emotions, it's not going to be successful.
Right, so clean it out and do it. Now listen, if you'd like to go back over what Karen has been saying, do that. Go to our website, which is ontheland.co.nz. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you've just missed the program, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then,